Los Angeles, April 12, 2025. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio is ablaze with the spotlight, but the room is dead silent. Jimmy Kimmel, with a pale face, suddenly stands up, his voice trembling with anger. You know what, Remo? It's time to end this. The audience gasps, cameras capture every movement. Remo Girone, the legend of the octopus, calmly looks at him, his eyes gleaming like steel. Thanks for coming, Jimmy mutters, and Remo walks off the stage, leaving shock and whispers behind. What did he say to push the show to this point? Why did Kimmel explode? It all started an hour before. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's jump into it. Los Angeles, the evening of April 12, 2025. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio shines with lights like a Christmas tree. The air is filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee from the dressing rooms and a faint hint of floor polish. The crowd buzzes with anticipation. Tickets for tonight's show sold out in just hours. As the guest is Remo Girone, the Italian legend whose portrayal of Tonno Caridi in The Octopus still makes the hearts of older Americans beat faster. Backstage, technicians check the spotlights, the band plays jazz chords, and the hum of the crowd creates a rhythm that pulses like the city itself. Jimmy Kimmel walks onto the stage to thunderous applause. His smile is as casual as ever, but his eyes sparkle with anticipation. Tonight's show is going to be special. The political tension in the country, debates about freedom of speech, the upcoming elections, everything adds weight to every word on air. But Jimmy knows how to warm up the audience. Good evening, Los Angeles, he shouts, and the crowd erupts in laughter and applause. We've got a hot night tonight. You know, I tried watching the news yesterday, but I turned off the TV after 5 minutes. It seems like even the weather is now a political issue. The audience laughs, some nodding. For those over 55, these jokes are like a breath of fresh air in the stifling atmosphere of media wars. Jimmy moves on to a few light stories about traffic on the 405, about a new trend on TikTok that he just doesn't understand. The crowd laughs and the tension eases. But enough about me, Jimmy says, winking. Our guest tonight is someone you definitely remember. He played Tonno Caridi in The Octopus, the series that kept us glued to the screen in the 80s. Please welcome Remo Girone. The band's music swells, and Remo steps onto the stage. At 76, he looks elegant. His gray hair neatly combed, his dark blue jacket fits perfectly, and his eyes are deep with a spark that betrays both wisdom and a subtle irony. He smiles, waves to the audience, and sits across from Jimmy. The spotlight reflects off his silver watch, adding a touch of old Hollywood charm. Remo, great to see you. Jimmy begins, leaning back in his chair. Los Angeles welcomes you. What do you think of our city? Wonderful, Jimmy, Remo replies, his voice deep with a warm Italian accent. But your traffic. Madonna, I thought Rome was chaotic, but you got us beat here. The audience laughs, and Jimmy claps his hands. Oh yes, that's our signature gift to guests, he jokes. Tell me, Remo, The Octopus is a classic. What's it like to be part of a show that people are still talking about? Remo smiles, his fingers lightly brushing the armrest. It's an honor, he says. The Octopus wasn't just about the mafia. It was about people, their fears, their dreams, their choices. We shot it at a time when Italy was really fighting the mafia. Every frame was like a breath. The audience nods. Many of them remember those evenings in front of the TV when Tonno Caridi seemed alive. Jimmy sees the audience get drawn into the conversation and decides to add some nostalgia. You know, my aunt was obsessed with Tonno, he laughs. She used to say, Jimmy, this man is dangerous, but I'd invite him for coffee. What did you do to charm everyone like that? Remo laughs, his laughter genuine, but with a slight undertone of melancholy. Nothing special, he replies. Tonno was complex. I just tried to understand him, why he was the way he was. I think people felt that. They saw not a villain, but a man. The audience applauds, the atmosphere warm like a summer evening. Jimmy senses that the moment is perfect, but in his earpiece, he hears the producers whisper, ask something sharp. He hesitates, but decides to move on. Remo, you mentioned choice, Jimmy says, his tone becoming more serious. You recently spoke in Italy about freedom of speech, about how the media affects us. That hit a nerve with many. Would you like to share your thoughts with us? The atmosphere in the studio shifts, like the air before a storm. The audience goes silent, sensing that the light conversation is turning into something else. Remo briefly looks at Jimmy, his eyes narrowing, but his smile remains. Freedom of speech is the heart of any story, he begins, choosing his words carefully but firmly. In The Octopus, we showed the truth about the mafia, and that was risky. Today I see a different risk. People are afraid to speak because they might be misunderstood. The audience falls silent. Someone whispers. The word misunderstood feels like a hint at something deeper. Jimmy feels his pulse quicken. He knows this could be the moment for the show, but also feels the danger. Are you referring to cancel culture? He asks, his voice playful, but with a hint of challenge. Remo pauses, his fingers gripping the glass of water on the table. The sound of glass against wood seems loud in the silence. I don't like labels, he says finally. I'm talking about fear. In my time, we were afraid of those in power. Today, we fear the thoughts of the crowd. And that takes away our dialogue. The word control drops like a stone. The audience explodes in applause, but there's tension in it. Jimmy feels sweat on his temples. He wants to change the topic, but Remo continues. We've stopped listening, Jimmy, he says, his voice soft but piercing. We shout, we blame, but we don't hear. In The Octopus, I played a man who lived in chaos. Today, I see chaos everywhere, in words, in thoughts. The audience freezes. Even the band stops playing. Jimmy hears in his earpiece, "At break now." But instead, he suddenly stands. You know, Remo, he says, his voice cold but trembling. I think we should wrap it up. Thanks for coming. The audience gasps. Someone shouts, "What?" Remo looks at Jimmy, his face unreadable, but his eyes sparkle. He slowly stands, nods to the audience, and walks backstage. The sound of his footsteps on the stage echoes like a clock in the silence. The backstage, the corridor, is buzzing with whispers. Assistants exchange looks. Producers scramble for their phones. Remo enters his dressing room, sits down, and stares at his cold espresso cup. The smell of coffee mixes with the tension in the air. He's not angry. He's seen this before. But something in Jimmy's reaction makes him pause. Jimmy stands in his office, staring at the monitor, where his words are replayed. His hands are shaking. He doesn't know why he reacted so sharply, whether it was fear for the ratings or something in Remo's words that hit a nerve. The phone rings. The network demands an explanation. But he doesn't answer. Diane, the corridor, the assistant whispers, "It's already online." Twitter is exploding. What happens next? Remo is sitting in the dressing room when a young technician knocks on the door. Mr. Girone. Jimmy asked me to tell you he wants to talk. Not for the cameras. Just like that. Remo raises an eyebrow. He could leave. Put this behind him. But something, maybe curiosity or hope, makes him nod. And in the studio, the audience is still buzzing, sharing their impressions. They feel like they've been part of something real, a moment that could change not just the show, but something more. The hallway behind the scenes of Jimmy Kimmel Live buzzes like a beehive filled with chaos. The cold fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, but the air is heavy with tension. The smell of coffee from the dressing rooms mixes with a faint scent of ozone from overheated cables. Technicians whisper, producers speak frantically on the phone, and on social media, the hashtag Kimmel vs. Girone is already spreading. Clips of the abrupt end to Remo Girone's interview are gaining thousands of views in just minutes. Los Angeles, April 12, 2025, feels like one of those nights that will be talked about for years. Remo sits in his dressing room, staring at a cup of espresso that has long gone cold. His fingers slowly spin the silver ring on his right hand, a gift from his wife, from the days of shooting The Octopus. In the mirror, he sees not just his reflection, but memories. Crowds of journalists in Rome, threatening letters after the premiere of the series, the eyes of young actors who were afraid to speak the truth. Tonight is not the worst thing he's been through, but something in Jimmy Kimmel's reaction makes his heart tighten. Did he say too much? Or perhaps not enough? A knock on the door interrupts his thoughts. A young technician, A skinny guy with a nervous smile peeks into the room. His badge reads Andy, Mr. Girone. He says, swallowing his words, Jimmy. Mr. Kimmel asked me to tell you that he wants to talk. Not for the show. Just. In his office, Remo raises an eyebrow. His first impulse is to refuse, to hop in a taxi, return to the hotel, drink a glass of Chianti, and forget this night. But there's something in Andy's eyes, sincerity, perhaps, or fear that he'll be fired if he doesn't complete the task. Remo nods. Ben A. Lead the way, he says, his voice calm but with a hint of curiosity. Andy exhales in relief and leads Remo down the hallway. Their footsteps echo softly on the polished floor, and from behind the walls, the muffled sounds of the show continue. Jimmy is already introducing the next guest, a comedian with a new stand-up. But even the band sounds tense, as if they sense the night has gotten out of control. Jimmy's office, Kimmel's office, is a mix of chaos and comfort. Scripts are scattered on the desk, a cup with the show's logo sits next to an unfinished donut, and a photo of Jimmy with Barack Obama, both laughing, hangs on the wall. But now, there's no laughter in the room. Jimmy stands by the window, looking out at the lights of Los Angeles. His hands tremble, though he tries to hide it, clutching his phone. On the screen, a message from the producer. Have you lost your mind? It's on CNN. When Remo enters, Jimmy spins around sharply. His face is pale, but his eyes burn, with a mix of anger, shame, and something hard to name. Remo, he says, his voice hoarse, thanks for coming. Please sit. Remo sits in the leather chair, his posture calm, but his gaze sharp. He doesn't rush to speak, allowing Jimmy to make the first move. Jimmy paces the room, as if trying to collect his thoughts. Jimmy starts, but stops, running his hand through his hair. I don't know what happened out there on stage. I didn't mean to kick you out. Remo tilts his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. But you did, he says quietly. Why? The word drops like a stone into water. Jimmy stops, staring at Remo, as if he's just revealed something Jimmy was afraid to see. I don't know, Jimmy finally admits. You talked about control, about fear. And I felt like you were talking about me. About this show. About everything we do here. Remo stays silent, letting Jimmy's words hang in the air. Outside the window, the distant hum of the city is heard, sirens, honking, a life that doesn't stop. The room smells of coffee and tension. You're afraid, Jimmy, Remo says, his voice soft but firm, and I don't blame you. We're all afraid. But fear is no excuse to silence others. Jimmy sits across from him, his shoulders slumping. He looks older without the stage lights and makeup. I didn't want to silence you, he says, but out there in the studio, I felt like I was losing control. People expect jokes, lightness from me. And you started talking about things. Things I'm afraid to touch. Remo nods, his fingers stopping their motion on the ring. I know, he says. In the 80s, I was afraid to talk about the mafia. But someone had to. Otherwise, we'd all remain in the dark. Jimmy looks at him, as if searching for an answer in those words. But the conversation is interrupted by a knock at the door. Ellen, the head producer of the show, enters, her face tense. Jimmy, we need to figure out what to do, she says, casting a quick glance at Remo. Twitter is blowing up. Half are calling you a censor, half a hero. We need to make a statement. Jimmy opens his mouth, but Remo raises his hand, stopping him. Let me, he says, his voice calm, but with a metallic edge. I'll go back on stage. But not to fight. To finish the conversation, Ellen gasps, Jimmy freezes. Are you serious? He asks. After what I did, Remo smiles, genuinely, for the first time that night. I played Tano Caridi, Jimmy. I know what war looks like. And I know that sometimes you just have to sit down and talk. Returning to the stage, the audience hums like the calm before the storm. The people who stayed after the break whisper among themselves, scrolling through their phones where clips from the show are already circulating. The band plays a neutral melody, but even the musicians look tense. When Jimmy steps onto the stage, the audience erupts in applause, but there's a mixture of curiosity and distrust in it. Friends, he begins, his voice trembling, but he holds it together. I made a mistake. I interrupted a conversation we all needed to hear. And I want to make it right. Please, once again, welcome Remo Girone. The room falls silent, then bursts into applause. Remo steps out, his walk confident but not hurried. He sits down looking at Jimmy, and in his eyes there's not anger but understanding. "Remo," Jimmy says, his voice quieter than usual. "I apologize." "I want you to finish your thought." Remo nods, his gaze sweeping across the room as if speaking not only to Jimmy but to everyone in the studio and those watching at home. "I don't want war," he begins. "I want dialogue. We are all different pains, different truths. But if we don't listen, we lose the chance to understand. I saw Italy fight darkness. And I believe we can do better here, now." The audience applauds, but this time, the applause is softer, sincere. Jimmy feels the lump in his throat dissolve. "How do we begin?" he asks, and it's not the question of a host, but of a person. With listening, Remo responds, and with respect. "Even when we disagree." The end of the night, the show ends, but the conversation does not. The audience leaves the studio, their voices blending with the hum of the city. Some are posting online, others calling friends to share what they've seen. In the dressing room, Remo pours himself another espresso, staring at the lights of Los Angeles through the window. He doesn't know if he changed anything tonight, but he feels a lightness, like after a long day when you finally told the truth. Jimmy stands alone on stage, now empty, holding the cue cards with questions he never asked. He thinks about Remo's words, about fear, about dialogue. And for the first time in a long while, he feels that the show might be about more than just ratings. It might be about something greater. The debate continues online. Some accuse, others praise. But amid the noise, voices are rising, quiet but sure, saying, "Maybe we should talk." And in that noise, there's hope, a weak, first ray of light after the night. But real, the empty Jimmy Kimmel Live stage still holds the echoes of the evening. The stage lights are dimmed. The band has long packed up their instruments, and the audience, which had been buzzing with emotions just moments ago, is now silent. But behind the scenes, Los Angeles, on April 12, 2025, continues to breathe. The air carries the scent of coffee mixed with a faint aroma of paper from scattered scripts, and the distant hum of the city, horns, sirens, laughter, reminds everyone that life goes on, even after the storm. Remo Girone stands in his dressing room, holding a cup of espresso that he never finished. His fingers no longer twist the silver ring, they are calm, like the sea after a storm. He gazes out the window, where the lights of Hollywood shimmer like stars, and for the first time that evening, he feels warmth in his chest. Not because he won or proved his point, but because he said what he needed to say. And they heard him. Jimmy Kimmel sits in his office, holding a phone, its screen still glowing with messages. Social media is buzzing. Hashtag Kimmel vs. Girone has turned into hashtag Listen to Girone, and amid the angry comments, others appear about hope, about dialogue, about how we can be better. But Jimmy doesn't scroll through Twitter. He stares at a photo on the wall. It's of him with his son at a baseball game, both laughing. Something about this night made him remember why he wanted to do this show in the first place. Not for the ratings, but for the people that a knock at the door brings him back to reality. Ellen, the producer, enters, her face no longer as tense as it was an hour ago. "Jimmy," she says, "the network wants us to release a statement. But, I think we've already said everything we needed." That moment with Remo on stage. People are talking, and not just online. The phones in the office are ringing off the hook. Jimmy raises an eyebrow. And what are they saying? Ellen smiles, for the first time that evening, genuinely. They want more of that. Real. Not jokes, not scandals. Conversations. Jimmy nods, feeling the lump in his throat dissolve. He knows there will be headlines tomorrow, analyses, maybe even a drop in ratings. But for the first time in a long while, he doesn't care. He thinks about Remo, his calm, his confidence, his words about dialogue. And about how maybe this isn't the end, but the beginning. The final act the next day. The studio looks different. Sunlight pours through the windows, filling the corridors with golden light. Remo should already be on a plane to Rome, but he stayed behind. Andy, the same nervous technician, intercepted him in the hotel this morning with an unusual proposition. "Signore Girone," he said, blushing, we, the team, thought. Could you speak with us? Not for the show. Just with us." Remo was surprised but agreed. And now he stands in a small briefing room, usually where producers scold interns. But today, it's not just interns gathered here, technicians, makeup artists, even Maria, the cleaning lady who always wears a cross around her neck. They all watched the show last night. They all heard Remo's words. And they all want to understand what comes next. I'm not a teacher, Remo begins, his voice soft yet penetrating to the soul. And I don't know all the answers. But I know we must listen, not just to those who shout the loudest, but to those who remain silent. Because in their silence, there is truth. Andy, sitting in the front row, nods, his eyes sparkling. Maria tightens her cross, and Liz, the makeup artist who always jokes around, is quiet this time, staring thoughtfully at the floor. How do we not be afraid? Andy asks, his voice trembling. I see what's happening online in the world. How do we not be afraid to say the wrong thing? Remo smiles, his wrinkles deepening, but his eyes shine. Fear is normal, he says. I was afraid when I filmed the octopus. I was afraid when I spoke yesterday. But fear fades when you speak the truth. Not to win, but to be yourself. The room fills with silence, but it's not oppressive. It's warm, like a breath. Liz raises her hand. What if we're not heard, she asks. Then speak again, Remo answers. But don't shout. Listen, and people will come to you. As Remo finishes, the room hums with quiet activity. Maria wipes a tear, Andy writes something in a notebook, and Liz smiles, as if lifting a burden. They won't change the world today, but they feel like they can begin. Epilogue. Euphoria. A week later, Jimmy sits in the studio, preparing for a new show. On the table in front of him is a letter from Remo, written by hand. It contains only a few lines. Jimmy, thanks for the chance to speak. Keep listening. Tana would be proud. Jimmy smiles, tucks the letter into a drawer, and steps onto the stage. Today, he won't make jokes about politics. Today, he will tell a story about how one evening reminded him why he loves this job. The debate over that episode dies down online, but something has changed. People are sharing not just clips, but thoughts about how they stopped listening, how they were afraid to speak. In small towns, in coffee shops, in family chats, conversations are happening. Not loud, not brash, but real. Someone writes a post. Maybe Remo is right. Maybe it's time to sit down and talk. And thousands of likes follow, not anger, but hope. Remo sits in his apartment in Rome, looking at the sunset over the Tiber. On the table is a glass of Chianti. Beside it, a letter from Andy, who writes that he's set up a listening club in the studio, where the team discusses how to make the show better each week. Remo smiles. He doesn't know where this will lead, but he feels the warmth, the same warmth he felt in Los Angeles. A small step, but a step. And in Los Angeles, in the studio where it all began, Maria wipes the dust off the stage, softly humming an Italian song. She doesn't know that her son, inspired by the show, wrote an essay about freedom of speech that went viral at his school. She simply sings, her voice drifting over the empty stage, like a promise of a new day. The viewers who watched that night still remember how their hearts raced when Remo returned to the stage, when Jimmy apologized, when the crowd erupted in applause, not from anger, but from unity. They feel euphoria, not because someone won, but because for the first time in a long time, they believed dialogue is possible. And that feeling, like a melody that won't be forgotten, accompanies them into every new day, whispering, listen, speak, and don't be afraid.